Okay, how do we write hypotheses for a one versus a two-tailed test? Well, it's actually pretty simple for a non-directional or two-tailed test. It gets a little tricky for the directional test, but I'm going to show you a trick. Okay, so let's start off with HO. Non-directional, null, nada, nothing. That's what HO says, null, nada, nothing. So you just write mu1 equals mu2. Now for your HA, be very careful here. If you're writing a non-directional hypothesis, you got to make sure that you're not specifying the direction of the difference. In other words, just say that they're going to be different. Don't tell people that, mu1 will be higher than mu2 or vice versa. When you're talking about the hypothesis, avoid saying things like, oh yeah, I think alcohol is going to decrease reaction time. All right, because as soon as you say decrease reaction time, you're phrasing your hypothesis in a directional way. So look at keywords. Make sure you're saying alcohol will affect reaction time. Alcohol will change reaction time. You're not saying which group is going to do better or worse. All right, so that's how you phrase a non-directional hypothesis. This is how you phrase HA, and this is how you phrase HO. Okay? Now, what about directional hypothesis? Remember, you have to have a directional hypothesis if you're going to do a one-tailed test. All right. Now, let's go back up here. If you have a non-directional hypothesis, right here. If you have a non-directional hypothesis, you cannot use a directional test. That would violate this rule. Right? So again, if your hypothesis is non-directional, well, then you have to do a non-directional test. You have to. Because in order to do a one-tailed test, one of the criteria is that the hypothesis is directional. So what are these directional hypotheses? Here's the trick. When you are writing your hypotheses that are directional, start with HA. So if you're saying that mu1 is going to be bigger than mu2, the non-directional is going to say everything else. So what is everything else? Mu1 is less than or equal to mu2. Right? So you see how that's different from the non-directional hypothesis? Here, HO says null, nada, nothing. Just make these the same. Here, HO is saying null, nada, nothing, but it allows for the fact that maybe you're going to be in the tail that's opposite to what you predicted. So start with this one, and then make sure this one says everything else. So for example, if we phrased it this way, HA says mu1 is less than mu2, HO is going to say everything else. Mu1 is greater than or equal to mu2. See how that makes it easier? Always start with this one. Now, if, let's say, you phrase your hypothesis in a directional way, all right, so let's say you phrase it this way, or like you phrase it this way. You have to also have the literature to back it up, right? But let's say that you have the literature and you phrase it this way. Does that mean you're forced into a one-tailed test? No. You don't have to do a one-tailed test. Just because you have the literature and you want to make a directional hypothesis doesn't force you. All right? You have the option. Now you can do a one-tailed test or you can do a two-tailed test. All right? So you have more doors open to you here. On the other hand, those doors close. If you have non-directional hypotheses, then you violate that first rule for a directional test. You have no choice. You have to do a two-tailed test.